It's delightful to see all of you here tonight, and I really appreciate all our speakers that are willing to come and enter into this dialogue about what we should do with community choice aggregation. The City Council had quite a tussle with it the last time they met, and they're going to be meeting on the 14th again and make a decision about whether or not to go with the Los Angeles system. And I don't know what will happen there or after that, but you all have a ballot, and after the session is over, turn those in, and we can let the City Council know how they should vote. They've actually been interested in having us conduct this dialogue, and I see our mayor is back there. I didn't think he was going to be coming, but
just here to observe.
yeah, right. So I think you all have a program. We're going to start with Roger Bradley, who's Director of Community Services for the City of Claremont, and then Bill Carnahan from Los Angeles Community Choice Energy, Barbara Boswell from Lancaster and the program, a somewhat smaller program they were running, and then Jennifer Shimon from South Pasadena, and I understand they're going it alone, so it'll be interesting to see what they've managed to do. So I think I'll just, at this point, turn it over to Roger Bradley. Thank you for coming, Roger, and thank you for doing this. I've asked each of the speakers to take up to 10 minutes, so we'll have lots of time for discussion later.
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Roger Bradley. I'm the Community Services Director for the City of Claremont. As indicated tonight, I'm just going to talk a little bit about community choice aggregation in general. The other program representatives will talk about their programs specifically, but I'll just give an overview of what community choice aggregation is, introduce the topic a little bit, and try to let you know kind of where Claremont is in the process, so you can figure out where we've been and where we're going. So to start off, community choice aggregation. So it is a legislation that was passed. It's not new. It's been around throughout the country, but it's relatively new to the state of California. In 2002, the state passed Assembly Bill 117, which allows communities to aggregate the electrical demand, to bring together all the energy consumption of a community and then go out on the market and procure energy on behalf of its residents and businesses. So what happens when you form a program like this? Everybody that's in the community that lives there, the residents and businesses, are brought into the program. So you become automatically, when a council decides to form a JPA or a CCA, sorry, there's lots of acronyms, so I'm going to probably go through this evening, and if I confuse them, I apologize. But when a council decides to form a community choice aggregation program, all the residents and businesses within the community automatically become a customer of the CCA. However, all the residents have a choice to go back and stay with, in our case, SCE, stay with the investor-owned utility. So it's about choice. Currently, as you know, we have one energy provider, which is SCE. CCA programs are about creating an alternative choice to the incumbent utility. So what does it look like? So you have kind of a couple of different models of how CCA or how energy is provided. As we have here, we have an investor-owned utility, so they go out in the market, SCE does, and procures energy on your behalf, on our behalf. They then have and manage a distribution system to transmit that energy to your home, and they send you a bill, and they do other administrative stuff to help manage the system. There are also, on the other part of that spectrum, there is a municipality that can do that. They can go out and procure energy for you. They can manage the distribution system and bring it to your home, as well as send you the bill. So community choice aggregation is just do I have a pointer? Oops. Is sort of just taking off the green portion here. It's taking off the energy procurement portion. So we're going to take over, when you form a community choice aggregation program, the procurement process of energy. So now as a community, we're going to go out and find our energy and procure it on the market and make those energy decisions on our own behalf, rather than having the investor-owned utility do that for us. As I mentioned, CCA programs are somewhat relatively new to the state of California. They've been around within the country for some time, but we've had only an active CCA program within the state for about 7 years. So Marin Clean Energy started in 2010. They formed a CCA program up in the Bay Area. There are currently about 7 active CCAs, and there are a number of other CCA programs in the process of developing throughout the state, and a number of municipalities looking, investigating the concept, which includes currently the Los Angeles Community Choice Energy Program, which was spearheaded by the county to create a community choice aggregation program that all the municipalities within the county could join. And we also have, as I mentioned, the Lancaster program here, which formed the California Choice Energy Authority, which grew out of the Lancaster standalone CCA program. So the city of Lancaster created their own CCA program for their city, and then through the expertise that they gained through that process, they went out and created a joint powers agency of community choice aggregators. So if we were to form a CCA program here in Claremont just for ourselves and not join another program, we could join their JPA and help gain economies of scale and efficiencies by being a part of CCA. And both representatives are here this evening from both organizations, and they'll talk more about those programs and the specifics of those programs tonight. But what is the benefits of a CCA program? So why would we as a community want to consider joining a CCA program? Well, right off the bat, in its name, is having a choice. So right now, as I mentioned earlier, we have an investor-owned utility which has a monopoly in our area. They are the sole provider of energy. A CCA program now provides additional option. And you can go and migrate back and forth between programs, but you can stay with SCE or you can become a customer of CCA. One of the other goals is to provide cleaner energy. So right now, SCE is under state law required to provide at least 25% of its renewable energy from renewable sources. They're actually at 28%. CCA programs can come in and provide higher level of content of renewable energy. For example, the LACE program is offering 3 energy packages, so they're going to do a portfolio that's consistent with SCE, so 28% of its energy is from renewable sources. They're also going to provide one that's 50% and another that is 100%. So you as a resident or business can choose not only what energy provider is going to provide energy to your home, but with the LACE program or with CCEA, which we as a community could join them and actually set our own portfolio packages. And then you can choose whether do I want to opt up and get completely green energy from my home, or maybe I only want to do half green energy, but I want to be maybe a little more environmentally minded, or I can just say I like to be a part of the CCA, but I want to be consistent with the portfolio that SCE has. The other part of that is we can usually now we have control locally of our energy provision. So instead of investor-owned utility making decisions on your behalf through the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, now we have our local elected officials making those energy choices on our behalf. So again, what kind of energy portfolio are we going to bring to the community? What kind of energy efficiency programs are we going to develop for our residents and businesses? Now your local elected officials are making those decisions and making decisions about local investment with the revenues that are generated from energy provision. And finally, the other part is CCAs generally are cost competitive, so usually can get a little bit of a cost savings over what's provided by the incumbent utility. LACE, for example, has done a feasibility study, and they're showing that they could provide a package similar to SCE that would save residents and businesses approximately 5% over the prices. And then they also could provide a 50% package that would save 4% but be twice as green in energy. And it's presumably that we would get the same kind of benefits from CCEA if we were to join them. However, we'd have to go about doing our own feasibility study beforehand to see exactly what those savings would be. So as I mentioned, we have 2 program options this evening that the community has a choice to join. Currently, we have the option to join both the Los Angeles Community Choice Energy Program as well as the California Community Choice Energy Authority. And we're directed by council back in May. So we first introduced this topic to the City Council at the May 23rd City Council meeting to let them know that we had received an invitation from the LACE program to join them. The council at that time indicated to us as staff to begin an outreach process, to go through the commissions, the committee process to get some feedback from the community about the desirability of these programs. We started that process in June, at the end of June, at the Parks, Hillsides, and Utilities Committee, where we presented the topic of community choice aggregation as well as joining the LACE program. We then went to On July 12th, the Community and Human Services Commission to provide them with an opportunity to weigh in on these programs. At that time, we got a recommendation from the Community and Human Services Commission to join the LACE program. We weren't at that time aware of the CCEA program, so we were talking about CCAs in general as well as potentiality of joining LACE. We had another dialogue on July 17th, just like this one, in this exact room, and we had an opportunity to talk to the community about CCA programs. And then we were getting ready to go back to the City Council in September when we were approached from representatives from the CCEA indicating to us that, hey, there's another opportunity out there besides LACE that you can look at. And there are very different programs, LACE and CCEA. They have pros and cons to both, and they'll talk a little bit about those tonight. We also went then back to the Community and Human Services Commission on October 4th to say, hey, you know what, there's actually another program. Maybe you want to reconsider whether or not you want to join LACE and go with this other program. The Community and Human Services Commission looked at both options and decided at that point to make a recommendation to the City Council to continue with the LACE program. And then we went to the City Council on October 24th. The Council held a special session right before its meeting on the 24th to look at and receive presentations from both CCEA as well as LACCE. And that evening, at its later regular meeting, introduced an ordinance to join the LACE program. We will be going back to the City Council next Tuesday, then the 14th, to potentially join the LACE program. The Council at that time can continue with the second reading of an ordinance to join the LACE program, can decide to not proceed with LACE, go with CCEA, or potentially decide to take no action and to let it for a later time or let the opportunity pass for now. The ordinance was introduced on the 8th because there was a timeline associated with joining LACE. If we were to join the LACE program now before December 27th, we can do so without any kind of financial contribution. Usually if you're going to join or form a CCA program, you have to provide startup capital, you have to do a feasibility study, which we would have to do if we joined the CCEA program, and there is a cost obligation to that. With the LACE program, the county has already put up the money for that, and they said that anybody that wants to within the county join with them, they can do so at no cost, but you have to do so before December 27th. So in order to continue to meet that timeline, the council went ahead and introduced an ordinance at the November 8th meeting. If they were to then adopt the ordinance to join LACE at the November 14th meeting, we'd still meet that timeline. But there's no timeline with CCA or doing our own program if we were to choose to do something else. It's simply to meet the timeline with LACE and to continue with that program that they introduced an ordinance. And so they'll revisit this topic on the 14th and talk about whether or not they really want to continue with a CCA program. With that, I think I will end my presentation for now and turn it over to Mr. Carnahan from the LACE program to talk a little bit about what they have and what their program offers.
Thank you, Roger. Looking at that list of all the meetings that have been held here in Claremont, I think I've been at all of them and made presentations at all of them. By my count, this is my 7th meeting to appear before you all, so maybe one of these days we'll get it across the finish line. And so I'm not going to go through my normal presentation because most of you have already seen it. But I'd like to just point out some of the observations and things that maybe haven't been discussed as much in the evolution of the CCAs in California. And that's, first of all, that I think, as Roger indicated, I think the City Council really has two decisions to make. One is, should they become a CCA of some type? That's the first issue. And if so, what type do they want to be? And you'll see some differences between Lancaster and LACE, and they're basically different business models. And so if the council makes that decision and to proceed, then they'll have to figure out which type they want to do. I could tell you, for those of us who are sitting up here, we are committed to the CCA question. We think it's the way to go, and we're here to try to promote that concept in California. So we would certainly urge the City Council to become a CCA, and I don't think you'll find any disagreement up here among, except Roger probably can't be committed, but certainly Barbara and South Pass, which I think the last time I looked, you were in LACE, right? Okay. So they're not independent, but there are some that are independent. They can either become a CCA and then join a JPA like LACE, which is a Joint Powers Agency, so that you have a seat on the board, you're a part of the decision-making process, you have sort of the coverage that you would have maybe in an LLC, because the revenues of the city don't get intermingled with the sale of electrical energy from the CCA, so that you and it can issue debt in its own name, and you're somewhat insulated from some of those risks. You could also become an individual CCA, and there are some examples of that in California. Not many. Most are of the JPA variety. In fact, I'd say probably 90% are modeled, and LACE is modeled after those. There are about 75 cities in Northern California who are CCAs and are part of one of the half dozen or so JPAs that exist up there. I'm not sure that there are really any individual members in Northern California. I know Apple Valley here is an individual CCA. And then the third type is what I think Lancaster refers to as a hybrid type, in which its model is different. There is a JPA that actually provides services to the members, but the Lancaster City Council is the board of the Lancaster JPA, where in our case, the members have representatives on the board of directors to make those decisions. It's really, I would call it a services model, but maybe Barbara can explain that better than I can. But those are really the three prevalent types, and I believe Lancaster is the only one that's the hybrid model. But to put this whole movement into context, I thought it might be of interest to sort of look back at some history. And 100 years ago in California, cities had decisions to make. Namely, there were a lot of private utilities scattered around, and it was just very inefficient and didn't work very well. And so there began to be a lot of consolidation among the private utilities. And at that time, the cities, really across the United States, had an option to either go give a franchise to the investor-owned utility or create what's called a municipal electric utility or publicly owned utility, which there are several. I'll mention some of those in just a minute. The bulk of the cities in Southern California chose the investor-owned utility model. And right now in California, probably 75% of all the customers are served by investor-owned utilities, and about 25% are served by municipally owned or publicly owned utilities. The investor-owned utility model, of course, is what's called a regulated monopoly. They are a private company. They make money by making investments and earning a return on that investment for the shareholders. And I would argue that at best they have a mixed allegiance between the shareholders and the customers in terms of who they're actually doing business on behalf of. They're regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission because someone has to control the amount of money, the rates they charge to earn money and make a profit. So the trade-off is they are a monopoly. The Public Utilities Commission in San Francisco sets the rates and the policies that are served to try to create a balance between their profit for the shareholders and the rates and services that they provide to the consumers. Okay, that's their business model. And that's existed for 100 years. The other model is the investor-owned utility model, or the publicly owned utility model, which includes cities who have chosen to own their own utility systems and provide that service as, again, a regulated monopoly, but the regulation comes from the local city councils. So it's locally controlled. It's nonprofit, so there are no shareholders. The customers and citizens own the system. So it can be argued, and I would argue, is there to serve the customer owners. And systems like that exist in Los Angeles, Anaheim, Riverside, Glendale, Pasadena, Burbank, Banning, little old Banning out there in the desert is a municipal electric utility. There are several examples of that model in Southern California. And that model has existed for about 100 years. But there's always been a movement behind the scenes for cities sporadically popping up who are served by an incumbent investor-owned utility who want to become municipal electric utilities. Historically, they've had a little better track record in terms of having lower rates, better reliability, better customer service satisfaction. And so a lot of cities said, well, there is a better way to do it. But it just didn't make any sense to actually condemn or try to buy the investor-owned utility systems. There was always a big battle of what do you pay for that system? Because the electric utility business is a capital-intensive business. It's really unlike, except for perhaps the water utilities, unlike any other department of the city. It's capital-intensive. Most all the other departments are labor-intensive. If you're wanting to deal with a police department or a fire department in terms of controlling costs, you're talking about people, you're talking about labor. They're about 75% labor. With utilities, it's capital. And it just didn't make any sense for cities to try to muster up the money to buy the electric distribution systems, because there's always an argument about how much should you pay. And it's big money. And over the years, there's been legislation passed that you can't use tax-exempt financing to do it. And so it just didn't make it practical for cities to buy out and become fully 100% municipally owned systems. So about 10 years ago, the concept of CCAs came up. At that time, the industry was deregulated in California. Edison and PG&E and SDG&E sold a lot of their generating facilities and got out of the generation business. They buy in the market. There was a market mechanism, an entity created in California to do that. So the CCA concept, and they don't make any money on that transaction. So the customers who leave and come from the IOUs to the CCAs don't affect Edison's bottom line for their shareholders. Doesn't affect their profits because they don't make a profit on that transaction anyway. Remember, they make money by investing in infrastructure and returning an investment on that infrastructure. So the legislators thought, well, we could actually carve out and spin off at least the energy portion of the three boxes that you saw up here of how do you get to production, transmission, and then delivery. And we could allow entities, cities who are currently served by the investor-owned utilities, sort of create a hybrid, an in-between an investor-owned and a municipally owned, and they called it a CCA. And the only function that they actually spin out is the delivery of energy to the customers. They pay, or we will pay, Edison for the use of and the delivery of their system to deliver the energy. And we will pay the same amount of money as that their existing customers pay, which is the cost of doing business plus the profit. So we will actually provide payments for those services that create bottom line savings to their shareholders. So there's no free lunch here. Everybody's paying their fair share. By the same token, they will continue to do the billing. It just makes sense not to duplicate a huge billing system if they already have them and those customers are already on their system, and those customers are still going to pay for some of the services for Edison. It's more cost effective for us as CCAs to pay them to do the billing for us. So that helps defray their costs and adds a profit margin to their bottom line. So the CCAs have begun to look at this throughout California. It's been predicted at the end of this year by the Public Utilities Commission staff that 25% of all the customers in California used to be investor-owned utility customers, and they're now served by CCAs. By the mid-20s, 2025, for example, they're estimating 70% of all the customers currently served today by the investor-owned utilities will be served by CCAs. So this is growing rapidly, gaining a lot of favor among cities who want to have what CCAs have to offer: local control, lower rates, better responsiveness to the customers. It provides customer choice directly at the customer level. And so those are attributes that many cities and many of their residents want to take advantage of. The only other thing I would say is that in the case of LACE, and I don't need to talk, Roger did a good job of explaining what the benefits are and all of that. I would just tell you that LACE actually started accepting members back in April or May, and currently we have cities of Rolling Hills Estates, Calabasas, South Pasadena, the county, of course, itself, West Hollywood, and 2 weeks ago we got Alhambra and Sierra Madre. Yesterday we got Beverly Hills as a member, and we have other cities who have either done the first reading or are about to have approved joining and are going to be doing the first reading of their ordinances. We have Downey, Carson, Agora Hills, Manhattan Beach, West Covina, who are all in the process of joining LACE, as well as Claremont. Claremont's actually adopted the ordinance on first reading, and if it's adopted on the second reading, then Claremont will actually be a participant. I think that probably the particulars about voting, there's equal voting which will cover probably 95% of all the issues. There is a provision that the smaller members can be protected by the bigger members if they want to call for a weighted vote. It can only be on an item that has created policy. You can't use a weighted vote to create policy. It's only to vote on a policy that has been adopted. You then can call for the weighted vote, and it requires 3 members. So if an individual member had over 50% of the votes, which is not likely, but if they did, they couldn't do it by themselves anyway. They'd have to have 2 of the smaller members to come along as well. As Roger said, there's no cost to join as long as it's done by the end of the year. We did receive a $10 million interest-free loan from the county as for startup capital. Just like any startup company, we have to have money to get started. And so since we don't have costs related to interest payments and whatnot for that money, the city has no cost to join. I think with that, I'll probably just stop and wait for the questions and see if there are things you want to know, but I'll give you a little background as to how we got where we are. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Barbara Boswell, and I'm here with California Choice Energy Authority, and Roger's going to do me the favor of opening my PowerPoint. A little bit about my background. I was the finance director for the city of Lancaster at the time that Lancaster implemented began evaluating CCA, went through the feasibility, study process, and then implemented their CCA. Since CCA is really a financial and procurement program, it did fall under my purview as finance director, and I was their acting executive director for their first year of operation. While we were going through the process of implementing, being the fine finance director that most are, I was a bit skeptical, and my main priority was protecting the city. I didn't want to do any programs that would put the city's general fund and general assets at risk. And we were able to provide those protections through terms and conditions in the contracts that we have with suppliers, that the credit and the pledge for the payment of the supplies are from the payments from the CCA customers only and not from the city itself. So the city's protected by terms in the contracts, and we've been successful in helping the cities of Pico Rivera, and San Jacinto is in the process and will have the same type of operating terms. So that's my background. So California Choice Energy Authority, and let me see if I can, is a joint powers authority. The 2 creating members were the cities of Lancaster and San Jacinto. The original purpose of the authority was to pursue alternative energy projects that would benefit the communities. We have currently 4 associate members. Those members are Lancaster, operating as Lancaster Choice Energy, and they launched in May of 2015. Pico Rivera launched in September 2017, so they've been operational just over 2 months now, and their program is PRIME, Pico Rivera Innovative Municipal Energy. San Jacinto is launching San Jacinto Power, and they are scheduled to come online and begin serving customers in April of 2018. And Rancho Mirage just recently approved their resolution to join the JPA, and they are on track to launch in May of 2018 and begin serving their customers. And they are Rancho Mirage Energy Authority is the name of their program. So each program is their own individual CCA, their own brand, their own community program. Just to demonstrate the differences between the programs, each program establishes their goals in terms of rates as compared to Southern California Edison. They each also decide what they would like to offer their customers as a base product. In the case of Lancaster, their base energy product is a 35% renewable sourced energy product. Prime launched offering a base of 50% renewable energy. And then both do have a 100% opt-up product. In Lancaster, it has a $10 per month premium, and Pico Rivera, it's $11. San Jacinto has yet to make those decisions. They will be going before their council here in the next month or two. Rancho Mirage, while they haven't yet established their goals, they haven't set their rates yet, they have set a goal of achieving at least a minimum 5% rate savings for their customers. So Lancaster Choice Energy, so in the CCA program, it is a JPA of CCAs, meaning that each city has their own community choice aggregation program. The revenues belong to the cities, they don't belong to CCEA, and they can choose to use those revenues to meet the needs of their community. For Lancaster, the types of programs that they've done is we have supported the electrification of our local bus system, so our buses will be 100% electric run buses. We have saved our customers, or they have saved their customers nearly $1 million over the course of almost 2 years of serving customers. They have contracted for a 10 megawatt local solar project in Lancaster that began serving customers in October of 2015. They have an economic development incentive program that provides credits commensurate with jobs brought to the community. They have applied for the energy efficiency funds through the California Public Utilities Commission so that then they can offer energy efficiency programs to their customers. They won't replace what Edison does. It will be in addition to what Edison provides. In addition, they've acquired and then converted all of their street lights to LEDs and then are expanding the electric vehicle charging stations. So some of the benefits of being an associate member of CCEA is one is local control. Bill is correct. The board of CCEA is the Lancaster City Council. However, the only decision that that board makes is to accept associate members. All decision making with regards to your program are made by your city council. So rate setting happens at the Claremont City Council. The decision in terms of renewable programs happens at the city council. What happens with the revenues or what type of programs you offer are all decisions made by your city council. The CCEA is merely the mechanism to provide back office support and to share costs amongst them, and that makes it more cost effective for the programs to run, brings down the overhead. And then it also provides economies of scale. We pull the energy needs together and do our procurement together. So just this chart compares the various structures which have been touched on by both Roger and Bill, so I won't go into great detail other than to say that the biggest difference is who's making the decisions and where's the benefit of the revenues. So the steps to become an associate member is first having a technical study and feasibility completed that takes the electricity usage historical data that Southern California Edison would provide. Analysis would be prepared to determine if it's feasible. Do you have, based on current market conditions and the usage in your community, what do the financials look like? Is it feasible to run your own program, and what type of revenue streams would you have? Assuming that that all looks good, then you would adopt an ordinance to establish a CCA, and then adopt a resolution to join CCEA as an associate member. And then we would go through the process of developing the agreements between CCEA and Claremont Community Choice Aggregation that spell out the terms of operations and how we work together. And then you would move forward and establish your CCA program. That would take approximately, I would say, a year to a year and a half, depending on how quickly we can get data from Edison, how quickly the city wants to move, how many community outreach meetings that you might want to have to help to inform your citizens and your businesses about what's happening. So those may take time. It can be as fast as 9 months to a year, but a year to 18 months is a good amount of time to provide a good amount of community outreach. And I guess I would just leave you with, you know, decision to create a CCA, and you have options, and you know, how do you decide which way you should go? And I think one of the keys is understanding why it is you're thinking about CCA, and what your goals are in terms of what that CCA will do for you. And then when you look at the various options, kind of weigh out which option best fits then that goal you have that you want to have from your CCA program. I know that you all have your Sustainable Claremont program, and you know, if you had a CCA, then you would have a revenue stream that could help you then meet the goals of your Sustainable Claremont program that you might not currently have. So just some food for thought there. And I don't know if I'm, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Sheeman from, she's management analyst at the City of South Pasadena, going to tell us a bit about their program. Thank you.
So my name is Jenna Shimon. I'm Senior Management Analyst. I handle all the water conservation and environmental programs for City of South Pasadena. And I'm here on behalf of one of my council members because we are very busy right now in the city with our general plan update. And so I actually was the staff member that took the staff report and went to the meetings and all that and brought it to our various environmental commissions and then brought the item to council for approval. And so really the main reason we decided on Lace versus Lancaster was, as I mentioned, the economy of scale, but also we felt we'd have more in common with the local cities in LA County that are closest to us. We'd have some combined goals. Also, it is just me that handles everything with an intern who works maybe 14 hours a week if I can get him that much. So to bring on my own program and for us to go through all the rate setting and just handle the whole program just isn't really feasible. We're a 3.5 square mile town, and I think there's 150 employees with our water department. So it really would have been difficult for us to take on that kind of a task. So that was probably one of the main reasons. Also, too, one of our council members, she knew a lot and did a lot of research about all the programs that are available, and so she presented them to me, and that was my favorite part, was that I didn't have to do as much work. So, and we still got the benefits. I know I used to work for a city that was the public-owned utility was the City of Colton, and that was what was nice, was having a say in what programs we offered to our customers. But also they're a member of Southern California Public Power Authority, so they all can combine together to offer programs and get a better rate for the residents. So like for water, for energy audits or rebates and incentives. So that was kind of another benefit of LACE, was we got to get the economy of scale for the incentive programs as well, for things that we may not even have considered or we may not be able to do on our own because we have so few customers. So that was some of the benefits for us. And I was mainly here for the question panel, so.
Thank you. And the next part of the program is the discussion. And for that, Richard Haskell, who is chair of Sustainable Claremont, is going to moderate the discussion. Thank you, Richard. I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Freeman. This is the part that I think we've all been waiting for. That was actually a very helpful introductory comment, and I think I could see a number of questions begging to be asked as a result. Okay, so I think we'll be sharing a mic, and I'll pass this one around to people who would like to ask questions. Anything else that we should know? Ground rules?
Make sure the microphone's on.
Yes, let's see if we can. Yeah, go ahead. Right. Is there someone who would like to ask the first question?
Test.
How did I know?
I'll ask the first question. Clearly, one of the important differences is what the cost would be comparing LACE with the Lancaster model. Can you make some comments about that?
My understanding is to join LA County, there would be no cost to Claremont. Should you pursue to move forward to create your own CCA or to create your own CCA and then join CCEA, The upfront cost for the initial technical study is $63,000, which provides the technical analysis of your electricity usage, the financial pro forma, and then the creation of the implementation plan, which is then filed with the PUC. The average costs for the most recent associate members who have created their own CCAs are in the neighborhood of $600,000. The city's, the recent associate members have had general fund loans for that, but we do have banks who will work with cities and provide funding and provide loans to provide those upfront costs, startup costs. And I will say that those loans have been projected to be paid back in a relatively short amount of time, 1 to 2 years.
Okay, Jennifer?
It's just a little follow-up question. What's the population of Lancaster?
Lancaster's population is 156,000. Pico Rivera is 60,000. And Rancho Mirage is 17,000.
And San Jacinto?
San Jacinto, I think,
San
is
Jacinto.
pretty close to Rancho Mirage at about the under 20,000.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a little feedback I see with the mics. Let me take advantage of this opportunity to jump in myself. Barbara, I think you mentioned that, well, let me just put it this way. One reason that we have heard a lot about for actually joining LACE versus trying to go it on our own, for example, is that there's a certain stability associated and minimal risk associated with an organization like LACE that might, in fact, ultimately have 50 cities, or and I think you mentioned earlier, informally, that you felt that you were getting some stability just as a collective unit of CCAs or even JPAs. How do you view that argument of stability if you're going it on your own versus joining a larger JPA that has many cities involved?
Yeah, I think the risks of operating a CCA are the same with the LACE faces as Lancaster in terms of regulatory risk, procurement risk, competing against Southern California Edison. Can we offer a competing rate? Can we do a better job than they do? I think those are all the same. I think what you're referring to is a smaller city, can we generate enough revenue to cover our costs? And those, there are some very small coastal cities, their margins were very small, but we've seen the pro formas that show that they can operate, cover their costs, have a net revenue stream that then they can use to meet their climate action plan goals. I'm with Bayshore, my partner Marshall is here with me now that I no longer am a full-time city employee. And I'm doing work with the city of Solana Beach, who's a very small beach community. I think they have they're very small. I think they're in the 12,000 population range. They're looking to establish their own CCA. And, they don't have the hot summers, so they don't have the peak electricity usage in the summertime that you have as an inland community. And it pencils out for them. So, it's just like any operation of a city. You every year have your budget decisions to make, and you look at, what are the revenues that are coming in and what are your costs, and you make decisions based on your revenue streams. So, but the risks right now, I think, are on the regulatory legislative front, and then with regards to something that hasn't been brought up, which is the exit fees that the customers who leave Edison and become a CCA customer pay. And that's a fee that is paid to Edison to reimburse them for the power that they have purchased for the Claremont citizens, should the Claremont decide to move forward in one direction or the other. Edison will have bought power on behalf of all of the electricity users in Claremont. And so their remaining customers should not be adversely affected by your decision to move forward. And so there is a fee that's called an exit fee, paid by customers. And that is a great topic of debate at the PUC level. There's an ongoing proceeding right now to evaluate how that fee is calculated. There is both sides of the issue feel it's not being properly calculated. There's just no agreement on how it should be calculated. And again, that fee or that risk lies whether you choose LACE or CCEA or to do it on your own.
The only thing I would mention is I think we ought not downplay the benefits of the economies of scale, and there doesn't seem to be a tipping point that if you get so big the economies go away. I will tell you that virtually 95% of the customers in California are served under the CCA JPA model, and in fact Marin, which is the oldest JPA CCA in California, is doubling in size. They took on the adjacent county, and literally the county they took in is bigger than the base members they started with. So they, after 10 years, have shown that they believe in economies of scale, or they wouldn't have let them come in. So I think the other part of that is I don't want to leave the impression that if you belong to a bigger JPA that somehow you don't have options to create your own programs. That's purely a policy decision of the board. There is a rate-making philosophy. There's a number of ways you can set rates to generate reserves or surpluses that come from individual cities. Silicon Valley does that now. I think their goal is to be 2% under PG&E. They have about a 5% margin, so they generate about 3% of gross revenues per year that they call a dividend. And at the end of the year, they funnel that dividend back to the individual members to do individual programs. And that's under the traditional JPA model. So I don't want to leave the impression that we can't customize like the individual member can do. That certainly is doable. Some JPAs are doing that. LACE doesn't have that now because we haven't done all of our policies yet because we don't have a full complement of board members. And one of the decisions that the board will be are setting policies like that, rate policies, et cetera, to provide individual funding for members to do their own programs. So just so you know, that's really common to both of the JPAs.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question about the exit fees and the ongoing negotiations that you mentioned. And I'm wondering, do we have any sense for a likely date when those will be resolved? And also, is there a sense for what the range might be? Because we might want to consider that when trying to estimate the profitability of different business models.
Yeah, the current schedule on the PUC proceeding is to have a decision by July of 2017. In terms of, what then what does the fee look like, or they haven't gotten to that point of the proceeding yet to have any visibility into knowing what direction it's going.
Just would also mention, in addition to the timing, I think the timing is always, it's always advertised to be quicker than it ends up being. So I think we're waiting a while to find that out. I can tell you that part of the risk mitigation, if you will, is that in the LACE model, when we did our feasibility studies about a year ago, we actually included an estimate that the PCIA might go up by 25% or more in our feasibility studies. So we do have a built-in margin there. We're not saying it should go up, and we don't support it going up, but to be conservative, we actually built that into our model.
I have a question that goes back to the reason for joining a JPA for energy utilities, and that is, it's my impression that the number one reason for doing this is in support of green energy. And but what about those of us who already have converted to solar and even battery systems? How is that affected by our city joining a CCA? And why should we move, and why shouldn't we opt out, since most of us are in tier 1 or below tier 1. And our utility costs are minor.
Well, let me just say, and Barbara certainly as an operating entity already has more real-time experience with that, but our intent is to not leave any customers out in the cold or force any customers back. We would intend to offer the same programs and benefits that Edison does currently. And I think in order to try to match the goals of some citizens who want to go 100% renewable, and for some citizens who are interested in cost savings, that's why we have 3 rate tiers. The first one is the minimum renewables allowed by law, which currently is about 30%. That's where Edison is. That's the cheapest rate, and individual customers can opt in for that rate. The next one is 50%, which is about, and the base rate's about 5% below Edison. The 50% rate is about 4% below Edison. And so the romance of that rate is that it virtually doubles the size of the amount of renewables in the mix, and it's still cheaper than Edison. The third one, of course, is at 100%, and it's about 4% higher than Edison's base rates. So it was an attempt to accommodate folks who are at opposite ends of the spectrum, realizing that some cities and some individual customers may have different ideas of what they want to see out of the program. So it was an attempt to take care of that.
So in Lancaster, we have actually a fairly high percentage of citizens who have rooftop solar. We also have an ordinance that requires a minimum sized solar on each new single-family home that's built, in addition to our CCA program. So why, if you have a solar program, why would you care, or why would you want to go into a CCA? Well, there are times when you are buying your electricity from Southern California Edison, so you would be buying it at a lower rate should the council choose to adopt rates that provide savings versus Southern California Edison, also at a higher renewable content should that decision be made. But in addition, in Lancaster's case, and I think in probably nearly all CCAs in California, if at the end of the year you have produced more energy than you've used, you get a rebate in essence from Edison. Well, the rebates from the CCAs are higher than those of the utilities. I think in every CCA's case. In Lancaster, theirs is more than double than what Edison would pay. So there is also a financial benefit to customers who have solar rooftop that produces more than they use at the end of their year.
Yeah, Bill, you answered one of my questions, which was we don't have to join either one of the groups. We could form our own JPA on a smaller scale, like Inland Empire or San Gabriel JPA. That's one thing. Assuming that what you just said is the way it goes, but then I was watching and looking at some of the slides that both you and Barbara are tied to a few cities that they have their own, I'm into the water end of it, and they have their own water companies and their municipalities. They're not investor-owned, some of the cities that you are working with. How does it work with a municipality as far as if you go over to this? Does the municipality tie automatically to the JPA, or can the municipality water side of it? Because water, there's a lot of energy there, and it's a very large water bill. I know our water bill, and one of my concerns is we have hydro stations all over this area, and we're making somewhere between $250,000 to $300,000 a year off that power. We have contracts with Edison. How do those contracts now interface if we were to opt out of Edison and go with you? Would we have to stay with those contracts, or can those contracts be moved? That's a tough one, I know.
You're talking about municipally owned water facilities?
This particular one, it's the wholesaler for the valley.
Okay.
And we have not only wells, but we have the treatment facilities here. But we're under contract right now with Southern Cal Edison with our hydropower.
Yeah, I believe it would depend, if I understand your question, it's what service area you happen to be in. If those facilities part of which are in Claremont, because that electric meter is in
They're in-
Claremont, it
they're in
would go
Claremont.
into
Most of them are in
Lathrop.
Claremont, some are in Laverne.
Yeah, if Laverne didn't come in, those would stay because they're not a CCA. But if it came for the facilities that exist here, those meters are all coded by Edison to be in Claremont, and those would all come unless, I guess, the water utility or whoever owns those facilities says, I want to opt back to Edison, which they could do. I think that's the right answer.
Okay, I'm
is that your
only
understanding?
concerned because the amount of money that's invested in our contracts, all of a sudden, things may change. And we could
Right.
opt out until the contracts are up. I understand that.
Right, that was gonna be my comment, is whatever contract you have with Edison, you clearly would have to, comply with the terms of that contract. And if I understand you right, that's a generation facility and you're selling power to, so if you have excess power that then could be sold somewhere else, a CCA, another entity could buy that excess power that you're generating. But Edison would continue, to comply with the terms of that contract as would you.
I was just more curious on top of that, between the two of you and what I saw on the screen. You're involved in a couple of the areas where investor-owned utilities are over the water department, or, over that water division. Pico Rivera, for instance, it's a county water agency. And I'm curious to see, and I'm going to go back and look. I took some pictures of those slides. I want to go back and find out whether they joined or stayed out. They might have stayed out until their contracts are up.
Pico Rivera has, they actually are implementing in 2 phases. And in September, they rolled out to all of the residential accounts and then their city accounts. And the commercial accounts are coming online in May. And so they haven't yet reached out to the business community. They're other municipal accounts.
All right, thank you.
I'd just like to follow up on Brian's question. Perfect question, Brian. Thank you for that. One idea that has been circulating in our community recently is the possibility, rather ambitious thinking, but the possibility of actually establishing a CCA ourselves with the thought in mind that we would pull in Laverne, Pomona, neighboring communities, and then having programs that would involve sort of a minor region. Does that sound, for us, we have a number of programs in mind, solar installations and so forth, starting with lowest family incomes first. A number of these programs that would really work well, sort of Claremont and beyond, so neighboring communities and so forth. Is that a crazy idea, or does it sound like it might have some traction?
Well, I would say that it is, aren't we all crazy ideas here? CCA is new, and you can cut the pie a lot of different ways, and certainly achieve goals that you set for what you're trying to accomplish with your CCA. And if you have, neighboring communities that are like-minded and on the same timeline as you, which can be challenging, then certainly maybe it's an option that you look at. But evaluating all the options all take time and can take a certain amount of money as well.
The only thing I would say is, I think your efforts might be better spent in whatever CCA exists. It's going to cost you a lot of time and a lot of money to do the feasibility studies to determine the economics, and you have to file an implementation plan at the PUC, and it's going to slow you down by at least a year or so from where either of these options would. I think you'd be better off if you're in a JPA to make sure you can get the kind of benefits that you want. And as we said earlier, there are ways to customize and get money back to individual communities to do the projects they want to do. That's part of what Barbara was talking about with their bus program, et cetera. So you need to make sure that happens, and you can do that within existing structures, get there a lot more quickly, and the existing structures would tend to have more economies of scale, which would save you money on all the other things you're doing as well. So you could do it, you know, you could be an individual or a subgroup if you wanted to. I would just tell you that it'll probably slow you down, and you may lose some of the economies of scale. And I think you can get to the same place by working within the structure of the existing CCA JPAs to make sure your interests, particularly if you're on the board and can get like-minded folks on the board to say this is what we want. You're setting the policy, so you could do it and get it that way. That would be my only caution. Is there may be a quicker, better, more economical way to do it.
Good evening. I just have a question about the ramifications of joining a CCA relative to SB 350 and the electrification of our transportation system statewide. So the 3 large IOUs have submitted projects to the PUC which call for approximately over $1 billion in expenditures to upgrade our electric transportation systems. And as CCAs, how would we be a part of that large plan? Do we as CCAs, either LACE or CCEA, do we have to submit our own projects pursuant to SB 350, or do we get charged by Edison under their projects since they're still doing our billing under the LACE program?
So as a CCA, CCAs do have to comply with the same rules and regulations that the IOUs are required to comply with. So Lancaster and Pico Rivera and San Jacinto all have to comply with the requirements of SB 350. In terms of Edison's individual programs, those are not then overlaid onto the CCAs. The CCAs would submit their own what's called an integrated resource plan that kind of says how they're going to achieve the goals of 30% by 2020 and 50% by 2030, I think it is. I get confused because many of the CCAs have already achieved their 50%. And but they do have to comply, but the CCA customers don't then pay for Edison programs, if you will.
I think there's one other element to that, and that is currently all the utilities, including the publicly owned utilities in the state, have on the bill a public benefits surcharge, 2.6%, I think it is. And that goes toward 4 categories: energy efficiency, renewables, low-income rate assistance, and research and development. I think I got them all. But there's no formula as to how the utilities spend in each of those categories. But they do have to collect that money, keep it segregated, and roll it back into one of those 4 programs. All customers pay that, so it would be my contention that as soon as the customers roll over from Edison to us, and we're doing the billing, we should be obligated to collect the 2.6 and use it for the benefit of our customers, instead of giving that money to Edison, because they're not serving those customers and getting any revenue for that. That should be a legacy that comes over to us by state law, really. And so we would then have a separate and distinct revenue source for those kinds of activities that would parallel what the IOUs and the POUs are doing. And there's not been a lot of talk about that. I understand there, in fact, are some prohibitions in the current law that we might need to get changed to allow that to happen for equity purposes.
Yeah, the funds are collected by Edison, remitted to the PUC, and then the utilities and CCAs can apply and do apply for the funds. Marin has submitted the application for the energy efficiency funds and successfully been allocated money from the PUC to develop their own energy efficiency programs. Lancaster submitted their first application this year, and they're waiting to hear that, but expect to hear relatively soon. And then it doesn't appear that there'd be any reason why they wouldn't be allocated, and then they could then use that money to establish their own energy efficiency programs for the benefit of their community. And LACE could do the same thing, and Claremont could do the same thing should you choose to create your own program.
Hi, I just wanted to tag along on Dick Haskell's comments about our end user energy programs. We have a long history here of being creative, and particular about working on energy efficiency through the city and CHIRP and Sustainable Claremont. I'd like to hear, because I'm hearing that both of you would support individual city programs, but I would like to know what the differences that you think your programs might present. I think there's some trepidation in joining a very large organization that we might get swallowed up. There's also trepidation on the other side that we wouldn't want to join something too small. But I'd like to hear you both speak to how each one of your programs would support us in launching and developing our own individual programs.
So in the CCEA structure, your revenues will always be your revenues. You are literally your own CCA program. You have your own implementation plan. You name your program. You set your rates. It's billed separately on Edison bills. Those monies go into your own account. CCEA merely is providing back office support and are certainly there to help you implement programs that you choose to implement. But again, your monies are not commingled with any of the other cities' monies. What other cities do, you are not required to participate. Now, there are opportunities to work together on programs that maybe there is mutual benefit, and there could be some opportunities to, I don't know, negotiate pricing for electric vehicles. I'm making something up just off the top of my head, or electrical, charging stations. But you literally are your own CCA program and in control of how that program operates and what you do with the residual revenues of that program. CCEA merely provides administrative and back office support and helps you meet regulatory compliance and power procurement, and then, benefit of our experience in implementing the program.
And from Lisa's perspective as well, your ratepayer dollars that come from your community are for your community. Equity would say that other cities cannot take that money from your customers because they're now your sub-customers within LACE and use it somewhere else. Because sooner or later, you're going to be on the other side of that table, and you're not going to want that to happen either. So there will be very close accounting of what money. When I told you there were perhaps going to be reserves and dividends, those have to be captured on a city-by-city basis and returned dollar for dollar. Otherwise, the whole theory that you don't lean on other members, you do what makes sense for both of you, and you pay your fair share, which is one of the discussions sometimes that talks about, well, what happens if a city wants to get out? Well, if a city is in LACE and commitments have been made on that city's behalf, they can't simply just walk away from that. They have to keep the other members whole. And so that equity concept really permeates everything. Otherwise, you don't have anything, really. You've got everybody fighting over every dollar, and it's not really their dollars. They can be identified as to where they came from. Some communities are going to have higher renewable rates, so their rates proportionally for each kilowatt hour are going to be higher, because their mix is different. So we have to keep track of all that to make sure that everybody comes out whole and nobody's leaning or robbing anybody else. So I don't know that, and that'll be a policy that will be administered by the board. I think there's some legal consequences there too, if you really stop and think about it.
I'd like to, we've had some really good questions, but I'd like to ask a very simple and basic and perhaps remedial question, but nevertheless, I think it needs to be asked. Of the programs that have already been started, and it may be too soon, and in fact, I guess it is for LACE, but I'm just wondering, there's been some question in our discussions as to whether, in fact, we're seeing any increase in the fraction of renewable energy sources used in the generation of electricity in those CCA programs. Even if we're just talking about the elected rates that, or the elected programs that CCA members would choose, where are we in terms of moving towards the goal, at least a stated goal, of the CCA program as being one way to accelerate our